Welcome to another episode of Raven Conversations. I'm Joe Seamantle, the State Public Affairs Officer for the Washington National Guard. And today I'm joined by Hendricks Hicks. He's a senior, I'm going to screw this up, senior site reliability engineer at Oracle, but you're also an OCS candidate in the Guard. And you're here to kind of tell us your story about it being a traditional Guardsman and your path here, which actually led you going from the Hawaii Guard to the Arizona Guard to eventually the Washington Guard. So, yeah, I mean, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, introduction for myself, my military career, like elevator pitch. I enlisted with the Hawaii Army National Guard in 2013 as a 94 mic radar repairer. And then once I got my undergrad degree from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, I got my first job in Tucson, Arizona. Well, not first job, but first software engineering job in Tucson, Arizona. So when I IST'd from the Hawaii Guard to the Arizona Guard, I was thinking, what's a good MOS that could transfer anywhere so I don't have to reclass again? And I was like, supply. Every unit has a supply section. So I reclassed to 92 Yankee Supply. And then I stayed in Tucson for about 2.5 years. And then I got a job here in Western Washington in Seattle with Oracle. And I had the opportunity to reclass again as part of this IST. And I thought, well, supply wasn't really in line with what I do on the civilian side. It was kind of like that duality of citizen soldier. I was like, let me think of something that's more in line with tech. And 25 Bravo, IT specialist, definitely aligned with that. So I stayed here to the Washington Guard, and I reclassed 25 Bravo. And then throughout this thread of like having my degree in the Guard, OCS is always in the back of my mind and stuff. And I was like, well, now that I'm here in Washington, a bit more settled, now that this IST was a bit more comfortable because it was my second one, I looked into it, I applied, I got in, and here we are now.
So how did you find out about the Guard?
Yeah, so my spiel for the Guard is kind of like a lot of other 20-something-year-olds in the when they're in community college. That's my story. So I'm in community college. I'm like, what's that jump to university, right? Like you kind of see the credit hours getting more expensive, and then you also have this student loans already from your undergrad. So kind of like straight out of an ad, I saw my recruiter at the time, Staff Sergeant Lopez. He had like the banner, and then this was the ACUs at the time. So I was like the citizen soldier guys back to back, the guys like this, and the guy with the book bag and stuff. It's like, pay for college, pay. I was like, and I talked to him. I was like, well, how does this work? And he's like, well, we have state tuition assistance, we have federal tuition assistance, but also you can qualify for the GI kicker. And I was like, oh, okay, well, how much does that cover, right? So you can say what's available, what's the dollar breakdown. And since Hawaii only has the University of Hawaii at Manoa, he was like, well, I know the credit hours. Here's what you would get, and here's how much you have left over. And I was like, where do I sign, right? I was like, I take that extra money and put it to my student loans. I was like, that sounds great. And he's like, well, actually, there's the student loan repayment program. So we'll pay off your student loans, pay for you to go to school, and you'll have money left over. And I was like, yeah, where do I sign? Pretty much. So we go to MEPS, Pearl Harbor, and they're looking at the MOSs I have, or the critical MOSs, right, available to get those benefits. And then 94 Mike came up, and I was like, yeah, kind of stay active. It's AIT, right, so you can trade Alkaline, but at least you'll be active for like a good amount of time. So yeah, I'll save money and all this stuff. And that's how that came about for my story with the Guard and enlisting.
So you're at the University of Hawaii, and you get an internship opportunity.
Yeah.
Were you already graduated, or was this part of something you had to have to graduate college?
Yeah, so that's what we connected on, right? Like I had my internship at NASA. So when it comes to like computer science degrees, you want those internships to have that experience for when you graduate. And a lot of those internships turn into full-time offers. And then for myself, I was getting turned down a bunch and stuff. And it was partly because I didn't have an internship the summer prior, because I didn't understand like the point systems or excused absences and stuff like that. So I was just going to AT and all this stuff. But by the time this internship this summer came around, I knew like, I could get excused absences. I could build up my points bank to still keep a good year. And then actually, I think we talked about it before. I was like in the pipeline for the NSA summer internship. And a lot of those, once you're like in the pipeline, it's like 99.9% conversion for full time, because you have to go through the full clearance and polygraph process. So that's what I was sitting on. I was like, and that's what I was going with. And then I get an email from a representative at NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Like, hey, this is so-and-so with NASA in Houston, and we'd like to set up a phone interview. And I'm like, okay, I've had a few phone interviews. We'll see how this goes. And on the phone, they're like, hey, we see this on your resume, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, this is what I'm interested in. This is my experience. This is where I'm at. And on the phone, they're like, so we'd like you to join us this summer, summer 2017. And I was like, wow, I wasn't expecting this. Usually there's a couple rounds. And I said, well, can you give me a week to think about it? And they're like, no, actually, we need an answer within like the next 2 days because they have their list of candidates that they have to go down. And it was a big decision, right? You're kind of under the gun. And a graduate student that was kind of like my mentor with helping me into the NSA program, we kind of talked about it. And he's like, staying with 3 other agencies kind of puts you on one path. And it's not good or bad, but you kind of have like your steps along there. Where going this route, like it gives you a bit more freedom, but it's also a bit more unknown. And I slept on it because I could only sleep on it one night. And I was like, you know what, we'll take the jump. And I ended up with NASA for that summer. Great experience, great people I met. And part of being in the Guard did help me get my foot in the door. Like, oh, well, because you have a clearance already, we know you'd pass our background check. So it'd be easy fit in. And then also that internship. So it's kind of like stepping stones. Like the clearance helped with the NASA, and then NASA helped me with the role I got in Tucson eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. So you moved to Arizona, and then you actually end up coming to Washington a couple of years later. Mm-hmm. And we talked about ISTs, right? At the beginning, you were like, hey, an IST from one state to another one, that's usually common, but you made another jump. Mm-hmm. How was that IST process? I know a lot of people don't know about that.
Absolutely. So my first IST from Hawaii to the Arizona Guard, my readiness NCO, like even he wasn't familiar with it because he grew up at his unit. So I'm talking to my readiness NCO, like, hey, I'm moving. What do I do in the Guard? Like, how do I transfer everything? And he's like, I don't know. Let's figure it out. So I had to think. I think I did like split trainings, like SUDAs for a while. So at least like I was getting my points and stuff, but I was still on paper at my unit in Hawaii. And I had to look it up on my own. And luckily I found a unit that was like that was in Tucson. I was 860th Military Police Company. So I drilled with them and I talked with them like, yeah, well, let's try and get you transferred over. We're trying to figure this out. And then once I kind of thought through it, I was like, well, a good move is to like call a recruiter. So you can just call, is it 1-800-GO-GUARD? Mm-hmm. Like, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm moving. Is there units in this area where I'm about to move? I'm like, oh, well, this unit and that unit. And I remember when I coordinated this, because I was at the end of my 6 years, that's when like your enlistment stuff kind of runs out. Like I graduated, so my loans were done with. Once you get your degree, you can't qualify for like GI Bill and stuff, right? So I was like, well, that's why I had the opportunity to reclass. But if you have those enlistment incentives, you want to make sure you find a unit that has that MOS so you can keep those incentives. But it wasn't an issue for me. And then a lot of things you have to keep in mind are like make sure your ERB transfers, because transferring states is effectively transferring like different mini armies, right? Mm-hmm. Because you swear allegiance to like, U.S. Constitution, all threats. Yeah. But there's always like that stipulation of like
the state.
And the governor of the state. Yep. So you have to make sure your ERB transfers, your licenses, clear OCIE, right? Make sure you clear all of that. And then I think that was the licenses and the ERB and awards, because you can enlist with the new state, but your ERB will be completely blank because it's like a new enlistment. So that was a bit of an ordeal. And then when I went from Arizona to Washington, like I was pretty seasoned. I was like, oh, let me just Google recruiters in Washington. Yep. I'm like, hey, I'm so and so. I'm gonna move. At the time we were in Tukwila. I was like, hey, I'm gonna live in Tukwila. So is there any units in the area? And they're like, well, what's your MOS, right? We want to make sure you keep it. And I was like, that's not an issue because I'm outside of my initial enlistment, so I'm good to just be an excess slot anywhere. And HHC with 81st, they're in Seattle. So I link up with them. I still have to do SUDAs, right, till you're on their books. But then I knew, like, well, to transfer licenses, I have to talk to the master driver to get my ERB straight, to make sure I kept my original from the Arizona Guard. And I go to S1. I'm like, hey, I have all these, right? Make sure we get these over. And then I make sure I talk with the readiness again, like, hey, what slot am I in? Am I XS, or am I in an actual MTO slot for the MOS? And I'm like, okay, well, I'm in this MOS slot. Talk to the training NCOs, like, can I get into a reclass school for the next fiscal year? Just making sure staying on top of those things is a big deal for IST.
Yeah. So now you're in Washington. You got a job with Oracle. You're in the Guard, and now you've gone to OCS. How is that? So how has being in the Guard helped in your civilian capacity?
Absolutely. So I think we talked about the National Guard with NASA and the NASA with Tucson. And the National Guard actually helped me with this role at Oracle. So originally, the position's changed a bit since I've been there, but originally it was for as a cleared engineer, is kind of like the term in the industry. Where cleared engineers, they support DoD contracts. So like you can think of like Microsoft has cleared roles, Amazon, Oracle. They're there to support like those government contracts, for lack of a better way to put it. And sometimes you're working in a SCIF, sometimes you're not. So when I interviewed, since they were building out this cleared team, they literally needed people who were like, they just had to check boxes. Do they have clearances? And then do they have experience in tech almost? There's a bit more to it, right? So at the time I had just a secret. And they're like, well, we need a top secret. How does that work? And I was like, I don't know either. Do you have like a FSO, like a facility security officer that would walk us through the process? And he's like, yeah, I think so. It's like, yeah, you'd qualify probably. And I was like, yeah, I think my lifestyle is such that I would qualify for a TS. So I actually got really lucky in that regards, where the secret, again, got me my foot in the door. And then I was able to get that TS on the civilian side. And then once it's in, formerly JPAS, I'm not sure what it is now, the Army was able to, Oracle's a sponsor, and then now the Army's a sponsor as well. So that's reflected on my ERB as well. And that's how kind of helped me progress in that regards from the Guard and where I am now. Yeah,
so vice versa now. How has your civilian career helped in your Guard career?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think a good way it's helped is just kind of, for lack of a better, for the best way to put it, is like just awareness, right? Like as you progress in your career, you kind of can't just keep your head down and think on what you're working on. So being an Oracle, it's a lot bigger company, a lot more opportunities. And like I've said, that role's changed where I've been in the company. And that's where it's had me reflect on where I am in the Guard and like what's my next move in the Guard and where things are moving around, where I can't just be heads down, Specialist Hicks, like, well, I'm just going to do this, show up to work or show up to drill, like text my chief like Friday night, like, what are we doing tomorrow again? Right? It's like, well, what's that next move? And I think that's where it's helped me keep my head in the swivel. And then we connected on LinkedIn, right? Where once you put those roles and you start seeing those like mutual connections, like, oh, so-and-so's at so-and-so unit. Like, how do you, like, what's the move to get there? And that's where I've always had OCS in the back of my mind as I've been working on my degree. But then, like, being here, it kind of like coalesced, and that's where I'm at now.
Nice. So what's kind of the next steps? Finish OCS and then find a adult job in the Guard, basically.
Yeah. Well, I'll still stay MDay, right? And at least for myself, I think like top 3 is like MI, Signal, and Cyber. And then we'll see where that goes, right? Because at least in my experience, MI soldiers always have an awareness of like the big culture of the Army. So that's where I'm hoping to see where they see other things moving and see where I can move. But like when you're in 01, 02, you're kind of heads down, focusing on BOLOC, focusing on your PL time. So not sure what the next move is, but hopefully I'm setting myself up so when an opportunity does arise, I can capitalize.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add to the folks listening?
Yeah. Not to be a to be a spokesperson. When it comes to the Guard, there's lots of opportunities. So make sure you reach out. I know they spin it as 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year, but if you put in that little bit extra, I think it'll pay dividends. Like we're here now, especially with OCS, I had to put in extra to get where I'm at, but about to commission, I think it's paid off.
Yeah, no, totally. If you like the video, give us a like. If you want to know more about OCS or Hendricks or anything going on, give us a comment and make sure you subscribe and catch these videos when they're out there. And thanks for joining us. Hendricks, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.